panelom. Hvala.
Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this panel is to incentivize systemic change in macro management by accentuating industrial policies able to generate sustainable and inclusive economy both toward the people and the planet as a whole. Our intention is primarily to understand mutually each other, representing different perspectives from academia to finance and real economy. And by doing this, sharing common view to the audience. Let me start, say a couple of words about the composition of the panel. Professor Uvalic Milica is professor of economics from Italy. Right now, she is visiting fellow of some prestigious research and education institutions around the EU. Slavo Radošević is professor of industry and innovation studies at University College London. Also, he is a member of some go-ahead group of luminaries concentrating on CEE8 group of economists. Đorđe Tanasković is the CEO of Target Serbia, one of the most successful companies from the real economy, which core business is floor coverings. Last not least, Matteo Colangeli is regional director of European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, investment banker by its background. I'm chairing this panel. My name is Dragan Đurićin, professor of business economics and management, World Academy of Art and Science fellow, and member of the UNESCO Advisory Committee for IDSSD. We will start with background and rationale of this panel and continue with 2 rounds of questions. In the second round, we will use the inverse order, let me say, LIFO, last in, first out order, which means that the last panelist from the first round will be the first panelist for the second round. In both rounds, we will follow the same pattern of 1 to 2 minutes moderator's question and 6 to 7 minutes response to the questions. Let me start with background of the problem. In order to welcoming you, in introductory words, we intend to explain how multi-crisis we are living in is flipping economic script in 10 slides. Previous construct, multi-crisis, depicts simultaneous emergence, interactions, and mutual amplifications of multiple drivers of crisis: economic, financial, climate, geopolitical, biotic, psychological, etc. Structural imbalances are imminent in economy with defects by design and without effective inbuilt corrective mechanisms. For years, imbalances are exacerbated through misconceptions and overestimations in economic reaction policies, all based, again, on market fundamentalism set of economic rules like liberalization, deregulation, privatization, financialization, globalization, etc. New drivers of crisis are external asymmetric shocks, like climate change, COVID-19 pandemic, geopolitical crisis, including wars. Right now, 4 nuclear power gaining for supremacy. Mentioned disruption creates headwinds to sustainable development trajectory, increase the magnitude of different waves of disruptions, and created conditions for emergence of, let me say, monster of polycrisis or multi-crisis, or crisis in the system of crisis, of rolling crisis, etc. DNA of this monster is market fundamentalism and its policy platform, collectively named Washington Consensus. Fault lines of market fundamentalism are well known. All are based on a linear model of growth following proposition of the planet as an open system, and neoliberal nexus of economics rules, ignoring limits and laws of nature, and promoting exclusively human ambitions. The results of all these difficulties is crisis-inclined system full of structural imbalances within human-made world, even in physical world and biosphere. Typical negative consequences in physical world are global warming and climate change, as well as depletion of natural resources. In biosphere, world biotic feedback loops like microbe pandemics, disruptions of biomass reserves, and growing extinction of living organisms. And in socio-economic system, financialization, unstoppable indebtedness, this time more than 100 trillion of US dollars, income concentration, investment myopia, brain rot, political polarization, and wars. As for global warming, we see that the planet in May 2025 was 2.3 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in late 1980s, when industrialization began. Keeping in mind that Paris Agreement target for 2050 has been set to 1.5 degrees, we can conclude that the planet heats up so quickly and tending to the boiling point. Previous is primary cause of extreme weather and long chain of negative consequences on economy and society. Another structural imbalance of the system is depletion of natural resources. As for this imbalance, the concept of so-called World Overshoot Day, which marks break-even point in the calendar year when humanity resource consumption exceeds humanity capacity to recover and or regenerate and or discover those resources with the same year is colorfully explained the point. As depicted in the figure, the global economy is projected to reach this ecological threshold as early as the June 6th this year. Definitely, the world is not enough regarding natural resources. Next figure shows that in 2026, if the rest of the world will consume non-regenerative resources at the same per capita rate projected for the US budget, global biophysical capacity of the planet would need to increase by more than fivefold. This is definitely not sustainable. Which is not sustainable will not endure. As for income concentration as detected of the system, Palmer ratio colorfully explain this imbalance. Palmer ratio compares the income share of the richest 10% of population to that of poorest 40% as top-bottom groups with greater variability in the income distribution. Great many economists have index larger than 1, including Serbia. Mentioned and other imbalances creates fractures in so-called system dynamics in terms of J. Forrester. Fractures emerged in socio-economic system or human-made subsystem of the system dynamics and spreading out to physical subsystem and to biosphere. Ideological exceptionalism and moral superiority of the market fundamentalism as ideology of the neoliberal capitalism after the PIP have reached so-called Seneca cliff in terms of Ugo Bardi. Namely, after the peak, the economy and society overshoot and collapse. So, solution from multi-crisis and regression is multi-transition, regularly named green transition. First step in this endeavor is paradigm change in human-made subsystem of the system dynamics with the aim to preserve other subsystem of the system dynamics. As for macro management, solutions primarily would require shifts from linear to circular model of growth and from orthodox to heterodox economic policy platform, combining invisible hand of the market and visible hand of the state. In alternative concept, industrial policy is a key element. So here we are. If you consume on proposed way the background and the rationale of this panel, allow me to continue with the questions to the panelists. Maybe dramatization is too high, but it's useful, I think, for this kind of discussion we are expecting. Let me start with Professor Milica Uvolic. There is no doubt that so-called development state with macroeconomic and structural policies in the interplay represents an alternative to market fundamentalism and alternative of the alternative Keynesian welfare state. So we have one solution and two alternative systems before the new solutions. Unfortunately, export-driven growth based on FDI as a blueprint of industrial policy approach for underdeveloped economies like Serbian economies carries the imminent risk of middle-income trap. Milice, after years of Serbia's intensified reliance on FDI in development strategy, combined with intensified state impact investment in infrastructure as another lever of the industrial policy. How do you assess Serbia's risk of entering in middle-income trap?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, the Serbian Association of Economists. Although I have been for many years outside of Serbia, Serbia is my home country, and therefore I'm delighted to be in this beautiful Kopaonik. Now, answering to your question, I also wanted to say how important it is that we have the topic of industrial policy today as one of the major themes of this conference. I'm personally somebody that has been advocating industrial policy for a number of years, but of course, nowadays it has a different connotation, and therefore I'm pleased to contribute to this discussion. Now, I believe there are sound reasons why Serbia could indeed remain stuck in the middle-income trap. And this for several reasons, despite the fact that we have just heard the governor and the Minister of Finance, shorter performance has been remarkable, et cetera, but in a long-term perspective, we have to consider that Serbia had a tremendous decade in the 1990s. We cannot forget that Serbia was one of the countries that was most hit in the early 1990s, but again, in 1999, Serbia had a 19% drop in GDP, and that automatically also very heavily marked its starting position after the political changes. Now, of course, after the political changes, Serbia has had a remarkable period of high growth rates from 2001 to 2008, but unfortunately there has been a substantial slowing down of growth after the global crisis. And if you compare the growth rates of Serbia with the other countries in the region, Western Balkan region, you will see that Serbia is the only country that had 4 recessions after 2008, in 2009, 12, 14, and of course 2020. So now we did have some remarkable growth rates recently, but as we all know, as we have heard also this morning, we have 2% growth rate in 2005. So in a longer term perspective, we see that Serbia has actually not managed to develop very fast. And now, according to the most recent data that I was able to find, World Bank data that I assessed the other day, Serbia's gross national income is $11,610 per capita, which places it in the higher middle group of countries. Also, of course, the other Western Balkan countries are there. But note that all the new member states of the European Union from Central and Eastern Europe are all in the high-income category. So they have managed to catch up. They have managed to converge much faster with the EU level of GDP per capita. And so, of course, the main reasons we want to discuss, I think, is why is Serbia still at such a low level of economic development, and why it has not managed to catch up quicker. And here, of course, I have to repeat some of the things that have already been said today and also yesterday. Structural changes have not taken fast enough. They have not been fast enough. The Serbian economy has not developed towards high, more sophisticated sectors, high technology sectors. And this is one of the reasons why, in fact, it has not had satisfactory growth. We heard also from Professor Pavel Petrovic's presentation yesterday that production is still concentrated in the low and middle technology products sectors. And of course, from today's perspective, we wonder how is it that in these 25 years we have not had faster structural changes. Now, way back at that time, of course, there were great expectations that a new privatization law, liberalization of the economy, restructuring of the economy, etc., would actually lead towards positive structural changes, but this did not happen. Foreign investors did arrive, and they arrived in quite high numbers, but unfortunately they invested mainly in non-tradable goods, which at least initially did not help the Serbian economy achieve good results regarding exports. And so, despite initial investments, we see that FDI has not helped the structural changes of the Serbian economy. Of course, there has been much more FDI into the tradable goods sector in these last 15 years. And Serbia has obtained very good results. If we look at the export GDP ratio of Serbia, we see that it has more than doubled from 2008 to 2022. Now it's 60%. But at the same time, we see that the major exporting enterprises are actually foreign firms. Out of the 28 major exporters today from Serbia, only 2 are domestic firms.
So, Milice, if I could understand correctly,
yes?
Real threat is middle income trap.
The real?
The real threat
yes.
for Serbia is middle income trap.
Well, there is a risk, and Serbia has relied heavily on, in recent years on FDI, and this is why another reason why it could remain stuck in the middle income trap, especially because of what we have also heard these 2 days. FDI is declining. It's much lower in this year with respect to last year. Many firms have already left Serbia. The labor costs have gone up, and so to answer your question, yes, Serbia does need a development state that would implement a much more targeted industrial policy directed towards comparative advantages of Serbia. But we'll come back to that, I think.
It's perfectly clear. Thank you for the first answer on my question. I will automatically shift attention to Professor Slavo Radošević. Industrial policies, by definitions, are correctors of the market failures and coordination problem, typical for market invisible hand. Taxes and subsidies are among the most effective policy tools for direct targeting the root causes of externalities, both positive and negatives. But using these measures means quantum leap in financing. So my question to Professor Radošević is going to be, the size of state sector in Serbia is roughly 43% of the GDP. It is broadly comparable with CEE8, aspirational group of economists. Professor Radošević, you're very familiar with, because you concentrated on this analysis. And this is similar with comparators countries like WB6, Western Balkan 6 countries. How would an expanded use of industrial policies in Serbia affect fiscal rules in Serbia? And related to previous, does economy in crisis possess fiscal space? A minister said today that we have fiscal space. To implement industrial policy approach in full capacity, keeping in mind that industrial policies are again experimental and or unconventional policies by definition. So this is pragmatic. So
thank
please.
you. Thank you very much. I like your question because it comes after because your question is implicitly, so to say, neoliberal, which means industrial policy means fiscal irresponsibility, and it comes after your presentation where you bashed neoliberalism. So I like that, that's a good starting point. We have to understand that industrial policy is not primarily about the size of the state. That you can have states which have a high share, in GDP and don't have industrial policy, or like Serbia, maybe you have it, but it's implicit. It's hidden, and that's the worst situation where you have implicit policy. So the crucial is to understand, to ask yourself what share of the public spending is oriented towards future, so to say. Of course, you could say roads are also and railways are also oriented towards future. Yeah, but they are basically preconditions, assumptions. But they don't go, if you go too much into that, and many countries can go too much into that, you enter into another trap. Political is easier, but that doesn't solve the problem. We heard today the minister talking about the human capital, very nice, but it's much more complicated. So the first is to understand that we have to think how industrial policy affects fiscal rules. First, crucial feature of industrial policy is not just spending. You can have lots of industrial policy which is simply about the coordination, simplification. To give you an example, when I came here by car, then I asked the driver, what about the, solar panel on your house? No, rules are too complicated. He gave up. Simplify rules for permitting renewables and grids. That's industrial policy. That doesn't cost you much. Then we have second layer, which is a co-funding, blended financing, colleague from EBRD can talk about this. That is kind of financially risky, but it's not directly attack on the budget. And only in the third instance, you then have to ask yourself, what is the direct fiscal impact? So how to go about it is simply treat industrial policy as an investment portfolio, which means you have to say, this is our cap. We don't go more about that level because that's fiscally sustainable, and governor will strongly approve it, I guess. But then we have to say, well, we have to think about the first pilot projects. We have to think small, introduce stage gate approach, because you can't bet on big. On 5 things which you go, after 1 year, 2 years, you will understand that half of them will not work, So you have to have sunset clauses. You have to have good institutional system, because what distinguishes industrial policy is not the size of the budget, it is the quality of the institutional context. That is what is a crucial thing. And very often that can lead to crowding out in investment. Of course, Serbia is not in the EU where, EU funding brings crowding in and leads to crowding out of the public funding. That's another situation. It's a more difficult situation, but industrial policy is compatible with fiscal discipline. That's the first thing. As long as you have the framework which enables you to treat it as an investment portfolio. Second part of your question has this implicit idea, it's crisis, we can't go now into your experimentation. We know it's popular. Everybody talks about experimental industrial policy. No, we can't go into that. And that is the assumption that industrial policy, experimental policy is slow and it's kind of luxury. I would say opposite. In crisis, you don't have time and you don't have funds on grand industrial projects. We know you are pressed with time, but the danger of your mistakes is tremendous. And therefore, experimentation is the fastest way to avoid wasting money. And this is where you have to focus initially, which means that you have to go with the pilot project and then see after 6 months, 1 year, what goes, what doesn't work. That is what experimentation is. You are learning in that. It's not kind of luxury, but it's actually the most effective way of investing into that. So it's a kind of fiscally smart industrial policy. I can go and elaborate, but I'm aware of the other two speakers, and so I'll stop here, hoping that there will be a chance for later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a very precise answer. We will continue with Matteo. From development bank like EBRD, action plan for green financing requires many things. Legal framework for carbon market in case of Europe CBAM. Rules of green bonds, sovereign and private issues. Green credit regulations, green taxes and subsidies rules, prevention of green washing, etc. Matteo, you have been serving EBRD, which mission statement is supporting convergence of CEE economies and Western Balkan economies with mainstream Europe association. Please tell us what you have learned from this experience, namely, what are key vectors shaping green transition relevant for Serbia's and Western Balkan 6 countries? And related with previous question, could you share with us key EBRD specifics in financing greener economy and digitalization, including AI, as great priorities of your bank in model of financing?
Thank you, Professor Juric, and thank you also for, I should say, actually, this is my 5th Kopaonik. It's the first time I'm treated to a panel in English. So thank you for that. It's also the first time I participate in a panel of an academic nature like this one. Obviously, my perspective is a different one. I represent an institutional investor, actually the largest institutional investor in Serbia. We invested more than 10 billion euro in this country over the last 2 decades. And indeed, a big part of our work in this country, in this region, is to accelerate convergence with the European Union. Now, compared to, if we look at the previous rounds of enlargement, the context today is radically different. It is different because of the geopolitical situation, because we have higher fragmentation between competing geopolitical blocs. So I would say the core difference today compared to when Croatia or other countries joined the EU is that geopolitical alignment is very important, if not the most important precondition. And this is evident if we consider which are the front runners in the region and outside the region today for joining the EU. When it comes to reforms with a sort of particular angle on green, I would say from the point of view of Serbia, certainly it is not conceivable for a country that wants to be part of the EU to be reliant on coal for the vast majority of its power. This is clearly generation. Clearly this is something that would need to change and changed in the majority of new EU member states. It is also not conceivable to be importing gas from predominantly, almost exclusively today, from Russia through a Gazprom-owned pipeline. So this is also something else that would need to change. And of course, the Nice situation, is a very good example of the consequences of geopolitical and foreign policy misalignment with the EU can have for a country like this one. Secondly, I would say, fiscal discipline, of course, is paramount, and it's the basis for everything. But investments, the investment gap, the infrastructure gap needs to be closed with the EU. So prioritizing the right investments, value for money, is very important for Serbia in the years ahead. And thirdly, I would say state-owned enterprises. Obviously, there is room for the public sector, even in EU countries. but it must be a public sector which is capable of operating in a competitive environment, not in a monopolistic or semi-monopolistic one like we have in certain sectors in Serbia. So these are three areas where for sure movement, reforms will be needed to converge faster towards the EU. On the second part of the question about green and digital transitions, well, these are two core elements of economic competitiveness. It is, of course, something that we very much focus on, and so do the partners we work with, especially the European Union. So we, as a BRD, operate on a sort of 360 degrees basis. We work with public and private sector. So when it comes to financing projects, we finance infrastructure, such as in the case of Serbia, rolling out broadband across rural communities in the countries. If we talk about digitalization, greening the district heating networks. If we talk about the green economy, SMEs are a big part of our work. So with both of those, actually with the support of the European Union and with grants, blending with our financing grants from the European Union, we make available basically programs to accelerate investments in those two areas. But the peculiarity of EBRD is very much that it's not only about investments, we also create the conditions for these transitions to happen quicker through policy engagement and through providing technical assistance, which governments sometimes need to implement those reforms. And in the case of Serbia, we're very proud to have contributed to the first two auctions for wind and solar power, through which a big portfolio of projects, almost 1.2 gigawatt in total, will be supported and are under construction. And are, I think this really brings a solid basis for the development of a sector, or sectors, solar and wind, which until very recently were relatively undeveloped in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo, for your answer. You colorfully explained the balance between secrets of banking industry and your role of catalytic in sustainable development of Serbia. So it's not easy, but it's feasible. Let me shift attention on Georgia at the end of the first round of this panel. To simplify to extreme, a green transition means proposing climate-neutral industrialization in energy and land use sectors. Despite remediation of climate emergency problem, industrial policy holds a significant potential to mitigate current output gap and increase total factor productivity, which is important not only for macro, but also for micro level. Target Serbia has a triple dependency on nature. First, it operates in land use industry, particularly in wood-related floor coverings business. Second, core business is energy intensive. And third, the company generates, let me say, negative environmental footprint. So strategic adjustments on mentioned three fields would require substantial increase in CAPEX, impacting possible negative business results and transferring profit maker into loss maker company. Georgia, how could the state help through impact investments as one important lever of industrial policies in providing solutions of mentioned dependencies in order to preserve, eventually improve level of profit making and level of value creation in this highly profitable company like Target Serbia?
Thank you, Professor. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for this invitation. My company and myself, personally, as your former student, is very well honored to be present here and to participate in this panel session. Indeed, target Serbia is a part of tradable sector, meaning that our performances directly affect the national export capabilities, macroeconomic stability, and integration into European value chain. Transition towards circularity, decarbonization, and compliance with the EU new legislation policy means that triple strategic shift is required in raw materials, energy, and environmental performances, and that means offshore increase in capex. From the other side, we also understand that all those changes are necessary at the moment, and we are lucky that measuring this new capex, we see that this capex is the most efficient capex in the company right now, because having in mind all the EU taxonomy and the future costs, we see that we are speaking about the capex with the lowest payback period. So yeah, we are trying to, let's say, to combine rationality with the expenditures right now. In order to safeguard the competitiveness while, let's say, executing this transition, we see the three main ways how the country or the state can impact or help the real sector. The first way is enabling predictable and competitive renewable energy framework. For energy-intensive companies like Target in Serbia, access to clean and affordable energy is precondition for maintaining market share inside Europe, having in mind the new EU taxonomy and the CBAM transition period. In the last 2 years, Target globally made the decision to cancel or to close 2 factories in Europe, in Luxembourg and Poland, and to move operations to Serbia. And one of the main key factors for decision was the access to the green energy. So we are still more competitive in terms of green energy and the price energy comparing to the European countries. On the top of this, the state can support us by providing stable regulation for green PPA. This is the first thing. The second thing is to increase grid capacity and provide fast track for industrial solars. Currently, we have a huge limitation of grid capacity and very slow procedure. When I'm speaking this, I'm looking at our friends from Metals company. I know that we are sharing the same problems here. And the third thing is co-financing energy efficiency upgrades through national schemes and EU funds. At the moment, we have only co-financing scheme for the household, and the Professor Odošević said, or Milic said, that it's very complicated at the moment, and we have something in agriculture. In order to support the real sector, we do not have the real support. The second way is strengthening the access to sustainable, natural-based inputs. Here, we're mainly speaking about the forest and the wood. Serbia can support expansion of domestic supply chains for the sustainable, for certified wood, for the recycled materials and bio-based components. They can do it by the following things. It's targeted impact investment and green industrial zones. The second thing is co-financing of biomass and recycling facilities. And the third thing is alignment with EU schemes. We have in our neighborhood very good examples in Croatia and Bosnia, how state successfully support the producers and how they're managing by the national forests, giving the opportunity to the producers to maximize the value of the nature-based inputs in the country and giving the advantage to the producers who has the maximal level of processing in the country, not just exporting those inputs to the other countries. And all those measures can stabilize input costs and prepare the industry for the EU requirements such as EUDR, EU taxonomy, circular economy action plan, and so on. And third thing is actually the supporting green optimization and circular economy technologies. We had the examples in the European Union when the governments using fiscal tools in order to support the tradable sector to, let's say, overcome all those expenditures, keeping or maintaining the competitiveness inside the country. So we also believe that Serbia can adopt similar measures like tax credit for investment in low carbon technologies, accelerated depreciation for the investment in circular economy equipment, CapEx grants for waste utilization, and incentives for digital monitoring as a part of taxonomy reporting. So.
Okay. Thank you, George. Thanks all panelists for the first round of answers. All panelists share with us profound perspectives. We appreciate, and now we will continue with the second round, following the previously announced LIFO principle, which means that we run in the same order of 7 minutes answers, starting with George. George, innovations are primarily engine of prosperity in every system, no doubt. However, innovation cannot be taken for granted, even if policymakers receive in full capacity industrial policy approach. Also, to be implementable for real-world challenges, innovation require some principles like purpose-driven scalability and applicability. Both prerequisites for innovation-driven economy we are looking for by implementing industrial policy require intentional policies rather than market reactive governance at both macro and micro level. Let's concentrate on micro level because you are representative of this problem. Creation and deployment of innovation, particularly for industry leaders like Target Serbia, requires sustainable balance between magic and logic, namely maintaining the influx of innovative technologies and products we are familiar with, and diluting earning powers, liquidity, and value creation because investment in innovation are uncertain. My question, Georgia, to you is how does Target Serbia promote the old logic in new circumstances? Precisely and shortly, is being green and profitable possible?
Yeah, I would immediately say yes, it's possible.
Perfect.
But just a more wider story, Target globally, and including European operations, of which the Serbia is the central part, I'm only speaking about the flooring industry, is the pioneer in closed loop and post-use recycling of flooring materials. The company runs the take back and recycling program since 2010, and during this time period we recycled more than 125,000 tons of floorings, taking back them to the production and making the finished goods. We signed Paris Agreement and we committed to decrease CO2 emission by 30% and to increase the recyclable content by 30% until 2030. It's not an easy job, especially taking into consideration the new occasions that we are moving production to Serbia, and actually we are expanding the production facilities here. But we are very committed in order to achieve this goal. And actually, this is the part of our DNAs, because strategic pillar among 4 other pillars is the let's say, main part of our strategy roadmaps. For a company like Target Serbia, market leadership today depends on essential balance, combining logic, meaning that we are compliant with the regulatory, that we have operational excellence, that we are very disciplined in terms of finance, and magic, our ability to innovate, to shape the trends, to anticipate the trends, and to shape the future of our industry. From logic perspective, our entire model is aligned with evolving EU regulatory environment, like EU taxonomy, EUDR, Circular Economy Action Plan, broader ESG regulations. But we truly believe that all these regulations are not constraint for us, and they structure our strength in order to ensure transparency and to prove our resilience on the market, and also strengthen our position inside the European value chain, providing the long-term future for our company. We also believe that sustainability is no longer a choice. This is the new industrial logic for us at the moment. At the same time, we are speaking about the magic. Magic comes from innovation. And we're constantly investing in R&D, in new technologies, in digitalization, and moreover, in development of next-gen product solutions. These initiatives and investments allows us to make products with lower CO2 emission, with a higher recyclable content, and enable us to open the new market opportunities and to provide the product differentiation, which is key for us in this situation, because the foreign market, I'm talking about the globally foreign market, is not rising at the moment. It's a flat, and you have to make some point of differentiation in order to be more profitable. So from our perspective and from our experience, being green and profitable is not only possible, it's necessary. And actually, both categories are reinforcing each other. It is not possible to be green without profitable, and be profitable without green in the future, and clearly understand this.
Yes,
So,
definitely this is encouraging answer.
exactly.
So we will continue. Thank you, George. We will continue with Matteo. Critical word today is convergence of the Serbia with mainstream Europe. But it's difficult to realize that target because, let me say, as for the level of investment to catch up the EU average in 20 years period, Serbia needs compound average growth rate of 7%. If we propose that the EU grows annually at 2.5%, which is not very optimistic rate of growth. Another thing Milica mentioned is structural changes. Achieve this kind of compound average growth rate requires upgrading across broad spectrum of industries, increasingly underpinned by AI-based tools and technologies. Last not least, Serbia has endemic inflationary pressure coming primarily from energy sectors, because we rely on fossil fuel-based energy sector under the impact of geopolitics. So, and last not least, because we are talking about great tickets of credit, the risk of greenwashing matters much. So, Matteo, I have some related questions to you. How does mentioned nexus of risk stressors determine EBRD credit policy? And how do you predict risk of greenwashing, which is a real threat in finance everywhere?
Okay, maybe let's start with the second question about greenwashing. I think we are past the peak in terms of risk of greenwashing, in the sense that the global discourse around, the global narrative around green is shifting to some extent in a healthy way, in the sense that I very much agree with George. Green and profitable go together. Ultimately, green should be about producing the same with less resources. It should be about having the same quality of life with less resources. So ultimately, the success of green should be visible in the P&L account of companies, in the quality of life of citizens. So these are aspects that are much more quantifiable and much more difficult to greenwash. So in a way, the shift, some could say, away from green, especially in certain big geopolitical actors, is healthy in the sense of bringing the focus on green on where it should have been from the start, not an ideological discussion, but what we can do to strengthen the competitiveness of our economy by using less resources to produce the same, and also to strengthen the resilience of our economy if the resources we are saving are actually imported, and they are imported especially from jurisdictions that bring some geopolitical risk exposure to our economy. So that's on greenwashing. About convergence of Serbia with the EU and risks, well, I would say in 2025, pretty much all the risks that could materialize have materialized. I think you didn't mention the Nice situation, but for me that is the one single problem that needs solving quickly because of the ramification it has for investment climate in the country. I think that until that threat, however distant it is, of secondary sanctions for anyone who has anything to do with Nice exists, I think foreign investors and domestic investors as well would be very careful about deploying new capital, about starting new ventures in Serbia. So that is for sure the number one priority. But a lot of other things went wrong in 2025. Still, the country achieved 2% GDP growth. That isn't terrible, and actually it's testament to the resilience of the Serbian economy, which we saw also during COVID times. Serbia has a well-diversified economy that has based on SMEs, that has proven quite resilient to shocks. Of course, 2% is not good enough. It's not good enough to bring about a lifestyle which is closer to EU average, to demotivate people from looking for careers elsewhere, to leave this country. So much higher growth is needed. 7% is what you mentioned. For that, of course, many things need to line up. But I would say, looking at the things Serbia can control, certainly continue with public investments, but smart investments, well prioritized, things that really unlock economic opportunity. Secondly, I would say invest in your SMEs. They are a great strength of this country, and whatever industrial policy is in place, creating domestic value chain around foreign investors that may come to this country should be the priority. And thirdly and finally, any industrial policy for Serbia, I think, should be centered towards EU approximation. Geopolitically, very clearly, Serbia must be a place that investors perceive as a country through which you can continue to have favorable access to the EU market.
Thank you, Matteo. Now, let me say we are on the third place. Professor Slavo Radošević is the next. there are many cases about industrial policies implemented in national economies. We have Biden economics, we have China EV value chain, we have Morocco strategy in high-tech industries and green energy deployment. We have, from the beginning of the last year, Antwerp Declaration in the EU. So it seems to me that in any policy platform, without structural or industrial policy impact is actually the losing ground. But one question remains unanswered. What's going on with leapfrogging in terms of technology development? Is it possible in case of Serbia, or we must base our strategy on autonomously developed innovations?
There are two questions here.
That's right.
Yeah, about the green transition. Obviously, green transition without industrial policy will not be a transition, yes, because you can import batteries, you can import wind turbines, but if you don't transform the structure of the economy, what you have done? You are very green but dependent economy. So the crucial is then how do you use greening as a push for transformation, and that is where green industrial policy comes. I was a bit shocked and taken aback today that none of the speakers talked about it. So I think you economists association have a lot to do and talk to government about that, because these are much more complicated forms of industrial policy, because they are much more dispersed, they are not concentrated, they are not big investment on a large facilities, because they are about the domestic supplier capabilities, they're about the engineering and system integration know-how across different networks, they're about the grid services, energy efficiency. This is all much more subtle and requires more capacity in that context. Of course, in Serbia you have extreme cases. I can't resist not to mention here lithium, because unless that is embedded in your upgrading paths of the economy, it will remain hotly contested political issue. It will simply be a disaster for the country in itself. And how to change the logic, how to change thinking about it is a crucial issue. And in that context, this leads me to the second question, which is about this leapfrogging. No country can leapfrog on its own. And I will be very, very specific. There is something called, which is a EU Western Balkan Growth Strategy. Yeah, Western Balkan Growth Strategy asks you, do your administrative reforms, do your regulatory systems, open yourself. You'll have some benefits from the market. Open regional markets, At the same time, the same EU, I know it very well because I produced several papers about them and I'm involved in the expert group, is very keen on industrial policy. And again, this is a huge opportunity for country that wants to improve its industrial policy. Here is the big neighbor who actually wants to take you into the system, and what is the most logical than to say, well, we would like very much to do what you asked us, but also we would like us to extend it to industrial policy. So not just opening, not just complying to a regulatory system, but what about our technological upgrading? What about the supplier chain, network chain in these areas? So it turned that into opportunity. But that means then negotiating with somebody else and using it to the purpose of your industrial policy. And this is something which for me is a bit shocking, that's still not even on the agenda, because the EU industrial policy is a big elephant there. And the country like Serbia should think first one, how can I benefit from it? What are those instruments and how can I engage and in that way use it for my own objectives? So that's kind of the most blunt answer on this kind of leapfrogging opportunity. Yeah,
yes, this is very real answer on the question. Thank you, Professor. And last not least, question to Milica. We are enthusiasts regarding the issue of industrial policies, no matter and no any questions about that. Last year, Nobel Prize laureate Danny Roderick released the book Productivism, inspiring people around the world to implement this concept of, let me say, comprehensive industrial policies, both vertical and horizontal, focusing on industrialization over financialization, production over consumption, homegrown resources over imported resources, particularly in energy sector, and local development over globalization. Does productivism work in case of Serbia? To be perfectly clear, it's not easy because it requires mindset change and mind-setting in terms of political influence. What do you think about this problem?
Thank you for bringing up Danny Roderick. That has been a very inspiring economist for many years. And I have to say that this new concept of productivism offers some new visions of how things should be done. So I certainly agree with Roderick about having to have a very active approach where you need coordination of policies of the government, of the private agents, but also NGOs. You know, in implementing an industrial policy that necessarily today needs to include the green agenda, I think in a country like Serbia, there are many NGOs that have been very much into the environmental problems of this country, and they're certainly, they will be able to help in devising the right policies to address the green agenda. And what Danny Roderick also stresses very forcefully is that the core of productivism lies in productivity, in raising productivity. So this is, of course, fundamental for Serbia, and that is exactly why we need to implement a much more diversified policy, industrial policy, that would use much more the internal sources of growth. Human resources in the first place, because I think this country has enormous potential, and there have been so many things done in the area of innovation and research and development and so on. But somehow these measures that have been implemented, the Innovation Fund has been, in fact, very much supporting entrepreneurial small businesses and so on, but they have very little funding. So somehow it's a pity to see that Serbia, that was already classified as a moderate innovator just a few years ago in the scoreboard, innovation scoreboard of the European Union, it has again been shifted to the last category of emerging innovators. Many things could be said also about the systems of education. I think it's, despite all the reforms that have been implemented in this country, somehow it's still not resolving some of the problems that we have on the labor market. We need to do much more in terms of skills of young people. Very frequently, firms have to train the young people they employ and so on. So somehow, this is another issue which is extremely important. But the problem is that policies in Serbia have not been consistent, and they are implemented in a very fragmented way. So there was a lot of effort to devise the smart specialization strategy for Serbia to see which are the comparative advantages, in which direction Serbia should go. What has happened in the meantime? It seems that it's simply been forgotten, and you know, I'm really surprised.
Stuck in the middle.
Huh?
Stuck in the middle situation.
And of course, in addition to what I have said about investing in human capital, if we look into what is happening in the European Union, clearly innovation is the key word for increasing competitiveness. We have had these two new reports by Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi, and they all precisely stress innovation. In Serbia, I think that instead of basing industrial policy predominantly on attracting foreign investors, domestic enterprises have to be helped more, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises, which are frequently in a disadvantaged position with respect to foreign firms. All this goes in hand with everything that we have said about the green transition. Of course, the green transition is extremely difficult for a country like Serbia that still uses a lot of carbon. It really has to seriously take into account all the issues that have to be done for decarbonization. I think that a lot still has to be done, and in addition to all the problems of the green transition and decarbonization, I think we need to also think about governance. This was mentioned several times also yesterday, precisely because somehow you cannot have an efficient set of policies unless you have a systemic approach to all these problems, unless you have a long-term strategy of development. Because it may sound somewhat outdated to talk about plan of economic development, but you know, the European Union has its 7-year financial perspectives where it's decided what is going to be spent for what, and so I think Serbia really needs something of this sort.
Thank you, Milice. It seems to me that we are on time. If we escape questions from the audience, and with great respect for my friend Branislav Vujovic, his successor of this panel, I will escape the questions from the audience, and let me thank you, the panelists. Let me thank you, the audience, for stimulative atmosphere for discussion. I really appreciate panelist insights to make shift from headwinds and stormy sea with monster of multi-crisis to bonanza, calm sea, and sustainable development in which industrial policies has roles to play. Thank you all. We are on time.